One of the illusions of the 19th century at the start of the museum age in America was the idea that art morally improves you. Now, I think I can testify that it does not. Nevertheless, the idea of social improvement through art struck a responsive chord in the American rich, who now began to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the setting up, the building and the endowment of museums. It may be that some of them felt on a quite deep level that this was tantamount to a religious act, but in any case they all knew it was tax deductible. God loveth a cheerful giver, and the donors had every reason to feel cheerful. The earlier American robber barons, Morgan, Frick, Carnegie, had amassed monuments to themselves, monuments of past art, housed in neo-Renaissance palaces. But the great change came in 1929, when the Museum of Modern Art was founded in New York. Today it seems such a natural title. Then it seemed very odd indeed. Wasn't the avant-garde against museums on principle? Hadn't the futurists wanted to burn them down? No European museum was trying to collect modern art in a systematic way. The idea of doing so was largely the work of Alfred Barr, who persuaded a growing circle of millionaires, centered on the Rockefeller family, to underwrite a museum that would treat modernism as a historical fact, as the culture of their time. Its present senior curator, William Rubin, recalls the policy.
I think Alfred Barr's aims were first to make a synoptic collection of modern art, that is to say, to show all schools from all nations, as opposed, let us say, to the groups of modern art that one found in European museums, which were heavily weighted toward the nation in which the museums were located, to try to balance these according to what he saw as their quality and their importance, rather than their provenance. This meant also not following any particular line, that is, toward abstraction or not abstraction or whatever. Nevertheless, I think it would be fair to say that there was a sense of avant-gardism that lay behind this, and that was a force that led to radical painting being more prized than, let us say, conservative, realistic painting of a type that the public was more familiar with.
By 1950, the MoMA, as New Yorkers call it with a sort of Oedipal affection, had put together a collection of 20th century art that no European museum could rival. It didn't take sides. All rivalries and differences and ideological splits were recorded on the museum walls, not in a partisan spirit, but as cultural facts. The museum wanted everything and its opposite. It defused the tensions of all moments by rendering them historical. From now on, modernism as such would tend to seem noble and exemplary rather than tense and controversial. So now the metaphors of temple and treasure house, once the property of museums of traditional art, could apply to modernity too. Scores of new museums were built in America in the 60s, and most of them looked like fortresses, culture bunkers, radiating an image of vast security. This one, the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, is in effect the set for the guns of Navarone without the guns. But the climax of the trend happened more or less just across the street. The National Gallery in Washington had been built and paid for by one of America's older mercantile princes, Andrew Mellon, in 1941. And several decades later, his descendants and their foundation laid out close to $100 million to construct this new East building. Its main feature was this enormous nave. Here people could stroll about and enjoy the sensation of being in the Church of Art without actually being obliged to pray. If ever a museum set up a building whose main function was to praise its own stature as an institution, this was it. The galleries themselves were relegated to the corners. The cost of this remarkable essay in museological splendour was about a third the price of a nuclear submarine, which puts it in one perspective. On the other hand, it was about twice the gross national product of some African states, which may put it in another. This may be pondered by anyone who does not think modernism is our official culture. The result of such expansions is to turn the museum from a sort of articulated tomb into a low-rating mass medium.
We have before us here, in concrete, marble, and glass, a tangible demonstration that excellence and access to a wide public are far from being contradictory. They are complementary. This building stands as a metaphor for what, at its best, the relationship between government and the arts can be.
And meanwhile, the interlock between new art, capital, real estate, education, displaced piety, and showbiz has gathered enough power to transform whole neighbourhoods outside the museum.
I'm in with the in crowd. I go where the in crowd goes. I'm in with the in crowd, and I know what the in crowd knows. Any time of the year, don't you hear?
When I came to New York to live in 1970, I moved into a downtown industrial district which, because it was south of Houston Street, was later christened Soho. Now, in those days, there were 2 art galleries in Soho, there were 2 Italian bars, no restaurants, no tourists, and quite a lot of peace and quiet. Today, 9 years later, there are something like 75 galleries at last count, dozens of restaurants and bars, and on weekends, when the peering hordes of dentists from New Jersey come down here to take their Gucci loafers for a walk among the bubble-top buses, there is very little peace and quiet indeed. Such are the healing and transforming powers of art. In the 19th century, artists used to live in bohemias, which were interesting but not chic. Today, they make places chic by moving into them, at least for a short time, until the landlords raise the rent and boot them out again, so they have to go somewhere else. This process is known as urban renewal. The Soho recipe of the art colony as a huge boutique, postmodernism and designer jeans, happened to other places, like this part of